Transition can be scary. It can also present opportunity. Inkululeko, a nonprofit in South Africa, is currently undergoing a leadership transition from Jason Toriano to Zuko Tabama. This podcast explores the process of saying goodbye and hello as one leader steps back and another steps forward. This is Catalyst in Transforming Nonprofit Leadership. Welcome to a new podcast. I am your host, Prince Moyes, and today I am here. I'll be joined by Jason Toriano, the creator of the Inkululeko nonprofit organization, and his associate, Zuko, who will be taking over the Inkululeko organization. How are you guys doing today?
Good. It's good to be here. Thanks, Prince.
Nice to be here. I'm excited about the conversation. So thank you so much for welcoming us.
Okay. And for today's first episode of the podcast, the theme will be the journey to Inkululeko. So without any further ado, and my first question for you, Jason, is what's your background in the NGO or community development space? How did this experience lead to you to creating Inkululeko?
Thanks, Prince. I went to school for broadcast journalism, and so something totally unrelated to the nonprofit space. I worked for a few years in television news and found myself really not super happy with what I was doing. And I thought back to a time when I was considerably happier. And it had been years before. I had lived in a tiny town in South Africa called Makanda. I'd been there for a few years and really loved being in Makanda, loved volunteering, and wanted to figure out a way where I could do that again in some capacity. So I went back to graduate school and I got a graduate degree that was focused on nonprofit management and starting Inkululeko. So I used my graduate degree to figure out how to begin Inkululeko. One important thing to note is before we did anything, we wanted to complement, not compete with what was already existing in Makanda. So we spent a year talking to people about what they were doing so that we could figure out a way to enter into the space and complement the offerings that already existed. The very last thing I'll say as it relates to that question is we wanted to do this in a way that was rooted in the community, that would be embraced by the community, and that would be sustainable. I am obviously not South African. You can hear it when I speak. I am a white American from upstate New York. And so doing that, there were extra considerations for me to go in curious and to learn from folks who had lived experience that I did not have. And I think we did that. I don't think we did it perfectly, but I think we did it well. And we're still learning and growing through this process. So that's how it started.
Okay, thank you for that, Jason. And my next question will be for you, Zuko. So can you share your background in community development and what drew you to specifically work with Inkululeko?
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Yes, thank you so much. My background in community development, I think mine started while I was still in high school. So in high school, I was heavily involved into student politics, and also student leadership. But I realized, I think when I was in grade 11 to grade 12 that community development is the way. I think I just use politics or student politics as a vehicle, for community engagement. And then when I got to varsity, then I made a decision to say, let me just leave politics and then focus solely on community development. So one of the things, in terms of community development, I've been involved in like a number of, sectors in the art space, in the literature space, the education space, just the whole holistically, in terms of community development. I've been involved because I've volunteered in different sectors, and later on, then I realized that my calling within the community development space is within the education sector. So, which is one of the reasons why I ended up joining the organization Inkululeko. I'm coming from another organization that was based and that was education based, and also my love and desire for research, I think, is one of the reasons that kind of like drew me into the space, and also the experiences, growing up in the deepest rural areas of Lusig in the Eastern Cape. matriculating in a township, in Humansdorp, going to a school that in a South African context, it will be deemed as Izo. If you know the series, you understand the kind of your schooling environment that I went to. So those experiences and wanting change for the next generation kind of like drew me into the space. And I've been immersed in the space, for the past almost 10 years now. And yeah. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's pretty much my background within the community development space. So it's really anchored in my personal experiences, my involvement, from the young age in the like volunteering engagement, engaging in student politics and student leadership, and also my love for academics, from the researcher's, perspective.
Zuko, going off the information that you just provided us, you said you had worked with a prior organization. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
All
That's
right.
correct.
From that prior organization that you worked with, so what do you believe everything that you learned from that prior organization, how do you think that helped you into elevating yourself in terms of working with Inkululeko as a whole?
Firstly, I think everything that has led me to this space, it was not by mistake, and I've been intentional. So just to give you a context, I first graduated for my undergrad in 2016. So when I left university, I was intentional where I'm gonna go to. I studied psychology, by the way, but I knew that I'm not going to get into the psychology space immediately. So I knew that community development is gonna be my vehicle, to achieve whatever, or to implement whatever I've learned in psychology, together with my experiences in volunteerism, to work intentionally in community development. But at that time, I didn't know what would be the vehicle. So when I left Nelson Mandela University in 2016, and then in 2017, I then got employment in this organization. So basically, what that experience taught me, and it was not the only organization. I was kind of like involved in different organizations, but this one, because of employment, I would say, yeah, it's in terms of formality, yeah, it's the one. But there were a number of organizations that I was also involved in, because I was so intentional in getting the space, getting all the knowledge, all the information that I get, and all the training that I get. So I would say the organization, basically, it was more of the technical aspect of how to run like an educational programs, how to coordinate, how to manage volunteers, like the basic organizational stuff. And then I think that probably, and also in terms of context, it introduced me into the Makanda population, and I've built relationships with different stakeholders when I switched to Inkululeko. So it was kind of like a smooth, because most of the learners that I was with in that organization, so some of them, I don't know if this is fortunate or unfortunate, they kind of like followed me to Inkululeko. So I, by then I knew them, and I knew where they stayed, their parents, and also the committee members. And also getting into Inkululeko, I think more than anything, it was more of like a community decision, because how I got into the organization it was a matter of, they know that I was part of that organization and other organization. And then because when I joined the organization, I was then pursuing my postgrad at Rhodes, having left the other organizations. So but Inkululeko was willing to bring me in on a part-time basis. So people, it was kind of like a recommendation to say, we know this great guy that just left that organization and is busy at pursuing his studies, but we know that he can do the job. And then I was brought into the organization, and as they say, the rest is history. Yeah. But I emphasize that it was more of like a collective decision, based on the spaces that I intentionally created when I left, or when I completed my undergrad.
Prince, could I add something before you ask the next question? And that is, Zuko said something that I think is important, because this is obviously meant to be a podcast that shares lessons amidst like a transition. So I'm leaving, Zuko is taking over. And one of the lessons that I have learned is something that Zuko just brought up. And that is, when you find somebody who is effective, smart, rooted in themselves, but also in the community, you do what you can to keep them. And so Zuko shared already that he was pursuing a degree when he started with us. And we could have taken a very hardline stance that said, if you're doing this, you're either going to school or you're working. working. And if we had done that, we would not be having this conversation right now because Zuko probably wouldn't have worked with us. And we would have lost out on years of effective, compassionate leadership that we have gotten from Zuko. And so the reason I share that is because I hope that for folks who might listen to this, if you find somebody who could do a brilliant job but needs a few accommodations so that they can pursue another part of life that they're passionate about, you make those accommodations if the person is worth it. And that's not to say that every single person will be. I don't believe that every single person is. But when you find those folks who are, you do what you can so that they can pursue what they care about as well. And that's something that when Zuko said that, it really struck me, and I wanted to highlight that. So back to you, Prince.
Okay, I appreciate that information. That was really useful. All right, so my next question is for you, though, Jason. Prior to creating Inkululeko, did you visit South Africa at any point in your life? And if so, what made you specifically want to create a nonprofit organization towards or cater towards underprivileged students in South Africa?
So I had been to South Africa. I had lived in South Africa for a few years. At the end of undergrad and post graduation. And I had volunteered at a school that was set up to support unhoused young people. And I loved it. I loved working with the students. It gave me purpose. I learned a whole lot simply by being there. And so, yeah, I had been in South Africa for a few years. Came back to the United States, worked as an anchor and reporter, and like I said, was not super happy doing that. So went back to grad school to figure out how we could do this. But I want to be clear, just because I lived in South Africa for a few years does not mean that I had all of the expertise that was required to do this. My lived experience in South Africa is one of the world's most economically divided nations. So there is a massive gap in South Africa between the very wealthy and those folks who do not have as much. The part of town I lived in was very privileged. The part of town I lived in did not face the same challenges that the majority of South Africa faces. So while I was there for several years, I did not have the same lived experience that a lot of the folks who we serve, that a lot of the folks who work with us have had. I share that because if I can think to like one thing that I feel like I've done really well, I've hired really well. Like Zuko is here because he's really good and he's really smart and he has lived experience that I do not have. But it's not just Zuko. I think we have, it's partly Zuko, it's a lot of Zuko, but we have created, I would argue, a team of people who generally work very well together, who have differing skill sets and different lived experiences, who are all pulling in the same direction. That doesn't mean that we don't have conflict at times on our teams. It doesn't mean a conflict that everything is always perfect. It's not. But I do think we have created an environment where everybody can bring their lived experiences and support our organization in ways that are important. So yes, I was in South Africa for a few years. No, I did not have all the lived experience that was required to be able to do this, but I think we bring people on board who do have that, and we all have something to contribute.
Okay, and that kind of segues into my next question about how did you guys meet, and were there any times that you guys butted heads along the way to getting to where you are now?
Zuko, you want to go first, or do you want me to? You take this. I see you smiling. You go.
Yeah, so I just wanna make sure that I get your question correct, Prince. So like when you say where did we meet? Like I saying in terms of like when we first or like when I started in the organization, like in what context?
You and Jason actually met, is what I meant.
Oh yeah, actually I still remember, but I don't know if Jason remembers. So Jason was in town, of course, with a group of students from Syracuse on study abroad program. And it was around at Pick and Pay, somewhere there at Pick and Pay, and it was just a quick conversation. I don't know if Jason, you still remember that. A quick conversation because
I don't remember. Go ahead, Zuko. Yeah.
it was during weekend and we are going to meet officially on a Monday, and then I was going to Pick and Pay, and then you were accompanying students there, I think to get something, and then you were with former colleague Xolisa. And then Xolisa said, "This is actually the guy." And then we met briefly before we met officially on a following Monday to carry on with the program. But yeah, it was June of 2018 when we finally met after I got into the organization early 2018. Yeah, it feels like yesterday. 2018. Yeah, now I'm thinking about, all the moments in Makanda, and yeah, the organization having just, a daily attendance of 15 learners, nutrition, bread that you usually get from Pick and Pay, and some butter and some apples. You know those moments. We're trying to build something that we saw that there is a potential in terms of programs. And there is a potential even in terms of moving the organization to the next level. Because at that time, I think there was only two, if not three of us, and there were only like two employees, and then other people they were in the organization on a voluntary basis. But we made things work, and from having a daily attendance of 15 learners to now, we usually have like a daily attendance that is close to 100. So that speaks to how the organization has developed, over the years. And it speaks to what we can achieve if we are determined to put, our resources together, be it our intellectual resources, the energies that we have, the strategies that we have together to build this beautiful organization. And what I want to emphasize, I think Jason mentioned this, is that the freedom that the organization afford, be it stakeholders or employees, it really works in our advantage, in terms of making sure that every decision that we take or everything that we do within the organization is based on consultation, and it's based on understanding the context that we operate in. Because if Jason, just said, you know what, if you are still studying, so I just want someone that's going to be doing this full time and all of those things, perhaps the results would have been different, because I always speak about, and we always argue with Jason about this, to say, in as much as this is a workspace and it's business. Someone will say it's business and all of those things. But we really need to have people that have a heart for this. I don't know if Jason, you still remember, when I got in, I think 2 or 3 months, there was an issue with payment. And then I told you about this maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then you were angry with me that, why didn't I tell you earlier that I didn't get my payment? And I said to you, no, for me, I'm not doing this for money. And it was not even a matter of, no, I have a lot of money and all of those things. But because I saw, how the organization is and how the organization is trying to establish itself, how are we trying to put a mark within the space and to grow the organization? So for me, money was not even the list of my priorities. My priorities were to grow the organization, which is something that we did, post COVID now, and we're still continuing, because when COVID came, it was kind of like, more flaky, shaky, kind of like process, because no one knew whether we're going to make it or not. But we're so intentional. So it speaks to the purpose and the passion that one must have to be in the space. This passion speaks also to Jason as the founder. If Jason was someone else who have come to South Africa, studied at Rhodes, leave and go to the States and get a corporate job, if you get stressed or bored or not motivated in corporate job, you change, you switch. If you feel like, no, let me just leave journalism now and go to law, and leave law and go to this, he should have done that, but the passion, understanding the challenges and wanting solution, or wanting to be part of the solution rather, wanting to complement whatever that is being done, in the space, to make sure that there is development in these communities. And most importantly, the future of these learners that come from less advantageous places, to at least have a hope and understand that their background and their circumstances don't define their future. And the imbalances of the past, they don't set as a foundation or propel them, to wrongdoings or to futures that might not be, are good for them. So that speaks to passion. It takes, maybe Jason will speak a lot about this. It takes so much for one to lead an organization miles and miles and miles away, having to trust people that you probably don't even understand their background and their context. You trust them with your vision. You trust them with your resources, you trust them with your money, you trust them with everything that you have as far as the vision of the organization is concerned. That takes passion, you know. So yeah, I don't know even where I was, but the having, the right people within the space is something that we need, people that are for the space. And yeah, Jason always counter-argued to say, even if you're not here, you don't have passion for the space as long as you do the work. But I think we need to emphasize that it always helps to get, a team of people that are passionate about this, because it makes things a lot easier. Even when the going gets tough, you have that thing that, no, they understand, and we are pushing and we are going in the same direction. So yeah, thank you.
I think, Prince, to answer your question, as it relates to when we met, Zuko already answered that. You asked, have Zuko and I always agreed? No, we haven't. And I don't think that's a problem. I think if you get somebody who constantly agrees with you, you have a yes person. And I don't think that that's good for the organization. I don't think it's good for you. So I'm not going to say, because it would be a lie, that Zuko and I frequently disagree. We don't. But there have been times, yeah, when we disagree. And I'm not going to get into specific examples because they're not terribly relevant here, but that we do not always see eye to eye. That doesn't, however, take away from the fact. I think sometimes people get into this trap where, oh, if I don't agree with this person, if we don't see, 100% the way I see it, that they're not suitable to do job X, Y, or Z. I know that when I leave, some of the things that I've started with Inkululeko, Zuko will keep, and some of the things he probably won't because he'll do it differently. And that is okay. That is the purpose of having a shift in leadership. And some of the stuff that Zuko does will probably work better than what I did. And some of it may not work as well, and Zuko will have to switch course, but it is going to be his decision to figure out the direction which he wishes to take the organization. It is also important to note, as I said, that just because you disagree with somebody sometimes does not mean that they're not an effective leader. And Zuko is very effective, and sometimes we don't agree, and both are okay. So that's what I would say as it relates to that.
Okay, thank you guys for answering that question for me, and I will leave it off at that. But for the second episode, we will be discussing the theme of transferring duties and the capacity building. I definitely appreciate you guys for your time and joining me today for this first episode, and I wait to do more episodes going forward in the future, and I hope you guys have a good one.